So, wow, it's really exciting to be here with all of us. The last time we were together, I think, was on the Eemskeland campus in October. And I know that you were all going on your TP3. You're all year 3 students who are going to different places around the world to do your 8 to 10 week practicum. Because we were in COVID, that was really a mystery. What your experience was going to be. Was it going to be online? Were you going to be able to make it across the border crossings? I know you had last minute changes in your itinerary. So I'd like to start just with this question about experience. What was your experience with your recent teacher practicum with ITESS?
Yeah. Shall I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
So my teaching practice was quite good. It was actually excellent, the teaching practice itself. But there were a lot of changes that occurred, of course. I think I had to be very flexible. I had to be very much adapting to new situations. At the start of the teaching practice, the idea was that there was going to be one class that was going to be at the school, which was year 8. And then gradually, as the internship would go on, there would be more classes that would come back to school to follow on-site classes. The situation went a little bit differently, as I had year 8 in the first 3 weeks, 4 weeks on-site, and after that, unfortunately, they had to get online classes as well, just as the rest of the classes that I taught year 6, 7, and 8. And at the end, I had all 3 of them online, which was a really good experience as well, though. A lot of opportunities that came from that. Yeah.
So let's connect to this. This is a little bit of a spontaneous question. But one of the questions that is really up in the air right now is the online teaching practice experience valuable? So if you can kind of say where you were, what your situation was, and how you jumped to this online situation, and was it valuable? And what were the challenges maybe you experienced just with that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I did my teaching practice in the Netherlands, in Groningen. And for me, the online aspect was not there that much, apart from when we went into the second lockdown, so middle of December. Then all of a sudden I did have to switch to online education, and of course then it also means that you have to be flexible, like Peter already mentioned. And for me that was one of the things, because it was relatively sudden. It did take up a lot of time, so I do think that if there is more of a focus on how to approach that as a teacher, as a student teacher, then yeah, definitely it's a valuable experience, I think.
So do you think it's important that our 4-year bachelor program includes some type of preparation and training for you to be teaching online in the future?
Yes, definitely, because that was one of the things that at first I was a bit wary whether or not it was going to be useful to have something like that. But now looking back at my own teaching practice, I do think it is something that, especially since we want to cater to the future needs of students of schools, that I do think it is important that something like that is integrated into the program, definitely.
So Max, if we were to design an aspect of this online remote teaching practicum into our 4-year program, what do you think would be the ideal length of time that someone would have an online teaching experience in the future?
So you mean if we had practicas that were specifically online oriented? Well, I think they could be similar in length to the in-person internships that we have as is, but I think maybe it would be a bit shorter, because I think at the end of the day there is almost it's not that you do less, you're still teaching of course, but I feel like there's a bit less you can learn from that than when you're actually there in person physically teaching the kids. But yeah, I agree with Tom. I think it should definitely be a focus.
So here's another spontaneous question, okay? So we have first-year students who are going to do a 2-week remote learning practicum with the school district in Wisconsin, okay? And that's going to be February 1 through February 12th. And we have 70 students who will work in pairs to log in to classrooms in Wisconsin. And what advice would you give these first-year students as they begin this 2-week remote learning practicum? They might have a chance to do a mini lesson. Most of their role is to observe the learning that is happening, okay? But thinking about what you have just gone through, what advice would you give them as they prepare for this? And this is also our teachers who are preparing our students.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it depends what they are preparing for. If they are preparing for observations, then I would say make sure that you have a clear idea of what you're going to be looking at. So, for example, thinking about having an observation schedule in place, because that makes it a lot easier for students to to fill out what they're actually seeing.
Have a structure to it.
To have a structure to what they are looking at. Or
So you mean have a lesson plan, if they could?
Well, a lesson plan, yes, but what I mean with an observation schedule is it's pretty much a list where they can just fill out things that they are noticing, and those have already been categorized.
So it's not chaotic. It's not just jotting down everything that happens.
And
So you're observing who's engaged, who's not engaged during the
what the
lesson?
teacher does well.
Where you could, for example, say, okay, during the starter, the teacher is doing this, this, and this. The students are responding in this way. And
then you can also grade certain aspects of the lesson, like how good was the differentiation, how good were the plenaries and things like that. And it's
So you're
already
looking
there.
for indicators.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, those are things that I have done quite a bit during my teaching practice 3. Because that was part of my research where I did observations more specifically focused on differentiated instruction. But you could do the same thing if you are observing online classes, maybe not with a focus on DI, but then more focusing on, okay, are all students engaged? How does the teacher make sure that the students are also showing that they are learning something? So what is assessment like?
So were you in a situation where you felt like you could support the mentor teacher by giving them some feedback about or input about the lesson that helped them identify students who were struggling and maybe give them some ideas about how to work with those students? Were
Very
you
much
in
so.
that situation?
Very
And
much so.
What were you able to say?
So as the situation was progressing with COVID and with online teaching, the mentor teacher also had to adapt. My mentor teacher was relatively young, so he knew how to handle the technology and integrate some online things into the lessons. But I think we as student teachers have a great amount of knowledge in online platforms, which we get lessons at ITESS. About integrating different online tools, and I think that is very valuable for every mentor teacher, and especially I would say if you're a bit older and you don't have as much knowledge about technology, we can be of great help to these mentor teachers. And speaking for myself, at my internship in Istanbul, I was able to integrate a lot of lessons, a lot of different tools into the online platform that was available there. And we already had experience with that. So to be able to transfer the lessons which you would normally teach and all of the different exercises into this online platform that was there for the school was greatly helpful to them. And I think I really helped my mentor teacher out. And I think that every student teacher who has experience in this and sees these possibilities can greatly help every teacher, because there is a need for this help, and there is a need for knowledge about these tools and these platforms. And
Wonderful.
I think
Wonderful.
anyone that can try to read into it, because we have the time now as well as student teachers, we can read into these tools, and that can be super helpful
You
for
can
the future.
do the research that
Yeah.
the core teacher
Yeah.
doesn't have time with.
Exactly.
So are there other things that our program specifically has taught you that you feel were just like, yeah, that was right on. Thank goodness I learned this at ITESS to prepare me for this practicum. Is there any other area or category that you feel like, yes, Shannon, keep this in the ITESS program?
Well, I mean, for me, one of the things that we did during our quarter before we left for teaching practice was during Educational Studies 3, where we also focused on students with special educational needs. And that for me was one of the things that was really useful, because even though I was mostly teaching on site, fortunately, because I mean everyone does prefer that over online education, but one of my students was severely autistic, and based on some of the bits and pieces that were pointed out during Educational Studies 3, which mostly focus on pedagogics and didactics, I was able to figure out a little bit better how to cater to his needs specifically. So also going into differentiation for a student that a lot of the teachers at the school actually already gave up on, and I was like, yeah, that's not happening. And they actually, within the classes that I taught, we actually saw him, kind of waking up again, and he started interacting more with his peers as well. So for me, that was really rewarding to see. But that's one of the things that I do think is extremely key. That we also look into the different needs of the students, and that's what we do within Educational Studies, of course.
What a powerful, powerful experience to look at a child every day, new and with a fresh start. So you, as a growing teacher, you come in and you just bring that fresh start to really care and love and see the good and the potential in a student. And when you're a veteran teacher and you've spent a lot of time and you've been through COVID, it makes sense that you get tired and emotionally fatigued, right? So to bring in fresh new energy and ideas, it's really a solution for ongoing education. And so when you're a teacher in the school, to bring in a colleague to say, hey, can you check out this situation? You're essentially bringing a fresh perspective when you collaborate with others. So powerful, powerful. So Max, are there any other aspects that really stood out to you about our program? I know you talked about the lesson plan and how,
That's
so
right.
share with us about the ITESS lesson plan and your appreciation for it.
Right. So, essentially in the first year, we already started learning about planning lessons on quite a basic level, but we had this template for a lesson plan, just a Word document, kind of a table with a lot of different fields that you fill in, and that included, for example, learning outcomes in the format of all students, most students, and some students. And from the beginning, I mean, they of course explained it in class, but since I didn't have any direct practical experience with how that all fit together, I actually simplified my lesson plan template down to something else, and I actually scrapped what I had, and I ended up designing my own kind of template for it. And then when I kind of finalized it and I thought it was in its ideal form, I actually took a look at it and I thought, wait a second, and I looked back at the one we got in year one, and I ended up creating the same template with just different terminology for some of the fields, but ultimately the same kind of template. And that was really cool because I actually ended up reconstructing what they'd already shown us before. But now I understood it on a deeper level because I'd gone through that process of actually doing it myself. So that was really cool, yeah. But I think if we're talking about good things in the ITESS program, especially for internships, I think what's really great about our program is we do learn a very contemporary approach to education. We learn a lot about, okay, it's not about being the provider of information and just having the students absorb it like a sponge. It's about facilitating learning, right, and about social constructivism and things like that. So that's something that I think is really, really important because my mentor teacher in Berlin was, also utilizing some of those newer techniques. But of course, you sometimes get a mentor teacher who's a bit older and maybe more traditional, and then that's what you already mentioned, Shannon. We can bring that more modern, fresh perspective. We're obviously younger, and we're being familiarized with the new approach to education, and that I think that can be something for a lot of mentor teachers to also actually learn from. I think Tom mentioned how his mentor also positively remarked upon some of the approaches that Tom took, which to him, of course, are normal because that's just what he learned in ITESS. But to a teacher who it's been quite a while since they had their teacher education, it can be completely new and very exciting. So I think that's great about ITESS.
So I was just talking with a colleague that will be doing some professional development for us next week, and I was asking him. He's now a founder of an organization called Inspire Citizens, and I asked him. I said, "So, Aaron, if you were to design a teacher education program, and you were to be an international teacher and go into a school, how much of your experience would be focused on the content of being a teacher, and how much would be learning the methods and processes of facilitating learning?" And he actually said, 80% methods. He said, when I got out of my bachelor degree, I have spent all my career gaining and learning methods to facilitate learning. And I thought that was so powerful. And I remember all of you coming from a history background. This is the phenomenological challenge. As historians, we think we need to have a lot of content knowledge, and that builds our confidence, right? But you get into a middle school classroom and you think, holy moly, I need to know more about teaching than I need to know about content. Is that true? Do you agree with this statement?
100%.
And what can you add to this?
Could I actually, because this is something I actually told both Peter and Tom when we discussed our internships. I taught grade 9 for the first time this year. Last year I did 6 and 7, so I was actually quite paranoid about not having sufficient content knowledge, and I had to teach the first lesson about the Weimar Republic, and I read up like crazy, and completely just got so much content in my head, but then I almost forgot, in a sense, to really focus on the structure of the lesson. So when I taught the lesson, my knowledge was, decently on point, but I was so worried about them catching me off guard and having to kind of show that I know this stuff that I almost focused more on getting the information out as opposed to really focusing on the lesson. And that ended up not going very well, unsurprisingly. And that taught me an important lesson as well. Like, yes, grade 9, you can have really more deeper level discussions with them, but at the end of the day, it's still, at that age level, it's still a lot more about the actual lesson structure. And if your lesson is well structured, and you have good activities, and they learn something during those activities, if you don't know all the content, it's not really that important. It's more about, if they go out there and they've learned something, that's fine. And if they do throw a question at you that you don't know, you can always say, well, I'll check that for you. Or what I once did was I told a student, well, if you want, you can look it up for us and then actually tell us at the start of the next class, which he did. So, no, definitely. Like the content, unless we're at university level, I think it's the teaching is still the key. Like the primary thing you're doing is still teaching. So.
Do you want to add to this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I couldn't agree more, because last year we did our teaching practice together in India, and I was teaching year 7 and year 8, and this year I was mostly focusing on MYP 5, which is year 10. And for me, one of the things I at first was really afraid of, also combined with the fact that my mentor was relatively traditional in his style of teaching, which meant that I had to be the expert in front of my students. So for me, that was something that initially I was very afraid of, but once I actually started implementing more activities and putting the ownership of learning more towards my students instead of me, as Max already said, instead of me directing it, that's when I started feeling more comfortable, because for me, I know that my strength is not necessarily within my subject knowledge. But I do know how to teach, and my strength is in my pedagogics and my didactics, and those are the things that we are focusing on a lot within ITESS, fortunately, because those are the things for me, especially within middle school, those are the important elements, because content, yes, of course it is part of what you're teaching. But if you don't know how to reach your students, then knowing a lot about your subject is useless.
And you can always read up on content
Yeah.
before a lesson. You can always cram it into your head somehow. That is always possible. But with something like teaching, or like Tom mentioned, pedagogic and didactic aspects of teaching, I mean, those are things you can't just read it in a book and be proficient. You know, you have to actually get the experience. So I think it's actually quite good that there is definitely less of a focus on subject knowledge for your main subject field, and much bigger focus on teaching in general in ITESS, and I think that's how it should be, because you can always, I mean, after the program you can always take another degree or even research in your own time and acquire the historical knowledge that you think you need. But once you've had the practical experience, that's what you've learned, and then it's hard to read a book and learn new things just by reading them. You have to actually have that practical experience.
And ITESS lends itself for that perfectly.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
And also the classroom discussions that we've had about didactics, about different approaches. Because I also like to be the one that says that no, content knowledge is more important. Just to see what people will say about it, you know, and to be kind of seeing why, and well, they've enlightened me, so to say, about the value that the didactical approaches and the way of teaching and how important it is, and that's what's been greatly helpful at my internships as well. And the discussions we've had, just like we're talking about it now, it is so useful, and you really take this away instead of remembering I don't know what a certain theory is called, or what a certain date is, and of course you have to know that because we are history teachers in the end. But yeah, this is greatly valuable.
What you're really doing in the classroom is creating a community of learning, and that is not just language, right?
Yeah.
This is real. Yeah. You are with your students learning together, and you all, I've seen you do this within the ITESS program. And I've been so inspired to see how you all are learning from each other, and the fact that you were calling each other, contacting each other as you work through challenges, right?
Yeah.
So when you are vulnerable enough in the classroom to explore questions that students have together without just automatically giving the answer, right? You really are modeling what you've also been exposed to in ITESS.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, and I'm so excited to hear about it. Can you, you want to say one more thing? And I wanted to ask you about the ESL experience, but go ahead.
About the sharing of knowledge as well, which I think is one of the great things as well, because I haven't even told Max yet, but he sent me a link to one of his units, like one of the units he prepared for I think it was Educational Studies 2, or one of the units that we did. And I actually took away a lot of that material and I implemented it in my classroom with slight modifications. So the sharing of knowledge, not only sharing of knowledge, sharing of content as well, knowing that it's well prepared, and knowing that I could always ask something to Max, for example, about his content, about his lessons, and that is also really, really helpful. Yeah,
because in sorry, Sharon, but last year in India, Tom and I actually designed a unit, well, not a unit, but essentially a project, an assessment together, and then we both taught it to the same level class, but separately. So we both had a grade 7 class, and we taught it to whichever one we were teaching. But we designed the assessment together, and the content was the same, but the approach was different. So that was actually really interesting, because I think Tom was definitely more heavily. It was more I think activity heavy, and I got a lot more content in there just because that's more the style that I teach. But it was really cool to also then discuss it afterwards. You know, okay, well, what went well, and I think we did have a bunch of points that we took away from it. We were like, okay, well, we definitely do this differently next time.
Yeah, no, I mean that peer-to-peer feedback, that is really one of the strong suits within the ITESS program, and like Peter mentioned, it's not just giving each other feedback, it's also sharing lesson plans, sharing units,
asking questions
to each other, literally, okay, I designed this lesson plan, what do you think of it? Is it any good? Do you have any suggestions that where I should make some improvements? So those for me are really vital things, also for self-development.
Especially when you're alone in a foreign country, you know.
And that is the thing, right? It's a big world out there, and we're going to, well, a lot of places in the world. We're going to the furthest corners of the world, and to have each other to also to call and to discuss these things, it's very, very valuable. Yeah, definitely.
So can imagine that 15 years from now. Imagine yourselves 15 years from now. Okay, because I had 15 years teaching and leading in international schools. And the people that I learned with, like you're doing, we've connected around the world. Imagine the networks that you can have. And imagine calling each other 15 years from now, and you've become a specialist in one area. You've become a specialist in another. You've started a company, okay? You have these different things, and so you will keep reaching out to each other, I really believe, and it's really special. And then you'll also try to encourage this kind of community learning wherever you go. And this is why you were offered a job.
No,
Really?
definitely. And that was, well, what we previously talked about with the online learning platform that I greatly helped them with the feedback and everything, and the classes I taught. They were so grateful, and to get such a fresh look at it, they immediately said, okay, you have to promise us if you finish your teaching degree, then you have to come work for us, and that is a bigger compliment you can't get. Yeah,
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah, wonderful.
So I wanted to ask you your opinion on what you experience with English as a second language. Okay, my experience in international schools is that every teacher is expected to have a high level of understanding about how to teach English as a second language learners. It's not just the English teacher, it's not just the ESL teacher, but you in your subject area have to be able to reach and teach in a variety of ways as an ESL teacher. What experiences do you have that either reinforce that idea or don't reinforce that idea?
Well, yeah. Do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a full-on fact that as a well, in our case, as a humanities or social studies teacher, we also have to teach English. And of course, it depends where you are teaching. If you are teaching in a country that speaks where English is the well spoken language, then of course it's different. But for example, even in India, where where English is also a common language,
An official language.
an official language. I did notice that quite a lot of students in the international schools do struggle with the language of instruction, which most of the times is English, and then it does mean that even as a humanities teacher, you do have to also differentiate when it comes to your use of language, which means that you are getting them acquainted with vocabulary, but also you're trying to explain to them, okay, how do you write an essay? How do you reference? What referencing format are we using? And those, for me, are all parts that do belong to teaching someone the language that is English.
So as we learn in ITESS, you have didactics of history, right? But what I find in an international school is that there really are didactics of being an English teacher. And I think it's an area that we all, in our program, as I look inwards, that this is an area we could grow.
Yeah.
So is there anything you want to say about that, or?
Well, I would like to get back to the English as a second language teacher, which I agree with Tom, we are, and also to link it back to the community-based learning we spoke about earlier, because I think that if you're good with your colleagues, and if you're in this international school, and you, for example, speak with your English teacher, and I even did this at my internship, where I had a couple of difficult words that I wanted them to know to expand their vocabulary, which you have to do as a teacher, in my opinion. And then I shared these words with the English teacher, and in the next test they would get these words as well on their test. And I think that's the best approach you can have, to link this English as a second language with well, doing this with your colleagues, and I think that's
yeah, and I mean, next to that, one of the things that I also do quite often is translanguaging, because some students they do know what a certain word means in their home language. So what I, for example, did with one of my students during teaching practice 2, he was South Korean. So I would pretty much translate every single well, word that was content vocabulary. I would translanguage that for him. So I would translate it into Korean, so he would be able to understand it. And with this particular student, it was actually the problem. He didn't speak, read, or write English, so I had to. And that is something that you can be faced with in international education, where you have a student that literally does not understand the language of instruction.
It can be quite challenging.
A few students.
It could also be that they don't have a common language between them, so then you have to do it for multiple languages, which is time consuming, but it is part of being a teacher in international education.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, can I just say, because my academic background is international, as you all know, and I myself did come to an international school initially in my 4th grade without speaking any English at all. So you're always going to have, and at all levels as well, can I just say that even up to grade 9 or even 10, you can still have students coming in who are maybe the children of diplomats, or just anyone who needs to travel around the world for their job, and they might just not be, they might either speak quite limited English, or they might speak almost no English. And as Tom already mentioned, last year in India we had a lot of those students in both of our classes. But what's really helpful there, I think, is when you have these these digital tools. Like, for example, in India, the school we went to was an iPad school, or an Apple school rather. So all the children had an iPad supplied by the school for their learning. So with that technology, they're able to have the textbook on the iPad and scan like certain passages just by wiping over it with like a brush tool, and then paste it straight into Google Translate into their home language. And that gives you like so much more possibility than I don't know, even just 10 or 20 years ago we didn't have that kind of technology. But I do think I 100% agree with Tom. It's an inescapable part of international education. That's just the way it works. You do have to. It's a part of your job. You have to teach them English. I mean. And the way you, for example, write a paragraph with evidence and explanation in history and humanities, social studies, is this. It's very similar, of course, but it is still not exactly the same as the way you do it for an English essay. And they need to know those differences. They need to have a slightly different style of approaching, writing a paragraph, writing an essay in social studies than they do in English. So I think, it's inescapably a part of our job, and it is something that we need to know how to do, and they do teach us some of that.
And if done right, I think it's one of the best parts of the job as well. Because if you see a student with a lot of potential, but the fact that they don't have the language abilities, you can try to have them research, have them figure things out with the help of you, of course, and then to see them grow and to see them be more proficient in the language, but with that also picking up these skills so fast, and even if they don't, right? But to see them grow is something really nice. I think it's something amazing, an amazing part of international education.
Yeah, exactly, because it really limits you when you can't express yourself in the language of conduct at the school, and I had the same experience when I started at the school that I went to. It's frustrating as a kid. You want to share your thoughts, you want to contribute to the lesson, but the language barrier just prevents you from doing that. So as a teacher, I think it's definitely almost our job to, as soon as possible, just get them in and somehow get them involved, even if it's on a very basic linguistic level, but just getting them to a point where they can contribute. Because I think when encouraged, almost every child wants to contribute. So
definitely, and I mean that's also one of the things that we saw together in India as well, is when you really start collaborating with with your colleagues, and in this case the ESL teachers, by, for example, implementing co-teaching, or there are a lot of different approaches that you can actually use to make it not only easier for the students, but also make it easier for yourself.
Yep, absolutely.
Because it is time consuming, and we are all aware of that, but at the end of the day, you are doing it for your students. You're
And
trying to
it's
get,
worth it.
It's always worth it, as long as you can just see a little bit of development with a student, it's already worth it.
So when you go into a school and you find those resources of support and you contribute towards those, you really start to build a database of things and tools that make it much easier to adapt to a student.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's great.
And I think that's something, the database of content, I think that's something that you build throughout that teaching career, and
Your arsenal,
especially,
your toolbox.
yeah, especially during internships, you take away something from every single internship, and I now have, I don't know, a nice database of different lessons that I created or adjusted slightly so that it's better for me. And I think every teacher has a different approach.
Yeah.
But when you get the content, when you get the presentations, when you can always alter it to your own likings,
Yeah.
and then you build this impressive database after your teacher education to get into the real world of teaching without having to work days and nights just to create all of this content from
Absolutely.
scratch.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, if I could give a piece of advice to just anyone, any of the new ITESS students or even the ones who will join in the future, it's something that I've learned, which is that from the get-go, it's important to just try to. Let me put it like this: you shouldn't be afraid to teach your own lesson. So something that I've struggled with a lot, and also especially just during this last internship, was I was worried about messing up, so I would teach. I would get the material from my mentor teacher, and I felt like I needed to teach it his way for it to work. And that's something we shouldn't be afraid of adjusting, because, I mean, let's say you make a big adjustment. You say, okay, this activity, I'll do it like that, and then it goes completely wrong.
Right.
No problem. It's an
Learn from
internship.
it.
Even if it's not an internship, even if in the future it's your job, you're still gonna mess up.
Absolutely.
And that's something that I really learned during the past internship, and it's something that I would tell to every new ITESS student: don't be afraid to make those adjustments, because even if you completely mess it up and bottle the entire lesson, it's fine, because that's part of the experience. It's part of it's part of your journey as a teacher. It's part of the development, right?
And if you're really doing it right, you'll be doing it 30 years later.
Exactly, yeah. And that's what they all tell me.
Yeah.
Teachers have been teaching, some of them have been teaching for 10, 20 years, and they tell me I still learn something new every day. I still have terrible days.
Yeah, no, and I mean,
It's all part of it. It's all
like
part of it.
linked to that is also, of course, the perfect teacher does not exist.
Nope. And the perfect lesson doesn't exist
The
either.
perfect lesson does not exist. So
You haven't been to my lessons.
Well, this fits with the idea that it's a mystery, it's not a puzzle. I don't know if you've heard this, but if it's a puzzle, then it's the right lesson, the right time, right?
Yeah.
But if this process of learning is a mystery, then there are a lot of different approaches.
Well,
that
it's
you
never
can take.
finished, you
It's
never
not
reach an
finished.
end point. It's the same with a lot of other things in life. You never reach a final point where you're like, okay, now it's perfect.
Yeah.
You're always learning, you're always adding more and more, and it's never a complete process.
This is what makes, honestly, this profession one of the things that makes it so exciting.
Yeah, I mean, because
Never gets boring.
It never gets boring.
One of the things that especially in international education, that you're trying to do is you're trying to instill in your students that they should be lifelong learners, and the same, of course, applies to us, especially as teachers, because you also have to be up to date with new developments, new didactical approaches. So for me, really, that aspect of lifelong learning that really does fit within the ITESS program and within the world of international education.
I think it's something you need as a teacher as
Yeah.
well. You need to have a willingness to learn, because if you don't have a willingness to learn, how are you going to teach that to your students? How are you going to make your students want to learn if you don't want to? So it's definitely something that everyone should ask themselves before they decide to become a teacher as well.
Yep.
Because of course it's fine if that's not the approach you want to take, but then I think it is something that you need if you want to go into teaching, for sure.
Great. I could end on that note. I really could. Is there any other reflection you've had from your teaching practice that you just say you have learned from so much that you're going to apply it? Any last words on this
Should we just
topic?
have each of us go?
Yeah.
Oh,
Let's finish
then
like
we can
that.
start with you, because
Yeah,
I need
yeah,
to think about it a little bit.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm in the middle, so for me it doesn't matter where we
So any
start.
last words?
Okay, well, since Peter wants me to start, I'll start. I'd say, because I think what I'll do is I'll just mention, for me, maybe the most impactful thing, but it is a personal thing, because of course there are, my peers will struggle with other things, whereas, and I'll struggle with whatever I struggle with, but one of the big things that I really I hope, at least, I think we'll see during the next internship, but I think something that I already started getting a bit away from, but I think I've really managed to kind of deal with now that after this internship, is just my approach to when lessons go wrong. And I think it's something that a lot of future ITESS students or first and even second year students are going to also experience, because I think we all do to an extent, which is you're going to sometimes teach lessons and the lesson doesn't go the way you want it to. Then maybe your mentor also happens to just throw in a lot of critical comments, and then suddenly your mood is all the way down in the basement and you feel terrible. And I think at least I had moments where I even questioned, do I even want to be a teacher?
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to, as hard as it is, to just shrug those off and just focus on, okay, well, it happened, I can't change it, I gave it my best shot, so I couldn't have done it better anyway. What's the feedback? How can I apply it to my next lesson plan? How can I do it better next time? And I know it's so much harder than it sounds, because once again, I'm still struggling with it too, but it's really important, just because it's easy to get down from a bad lesson, but sometimes you can teach a lesson that you felt went absolutely abhorrently, but your students might have enjoyed it.
Yes.
Because sometimes you'll teach a lesson where you don't get a lot done, but the students sometimes like to just
Yeah.
relax for a bit.
Yeah.
So I think as long as your students are kind of
Yeah.
smiling and they're having a good time at the end of the lesson, it's okay.
Yeah.
And even if they don't, okay, then just do it better
There's
next
going
time.
to be something in the lesson that was positive.
Exactly.
Exactly.
There's always something.
Always.
Always. And at the same time, having that growth mindset, dusting yourself off, learning from it.
Yeah.
And
And don't be
moving
afraid
forward.
to mess up. And that's what I'm gonna really
You
try
can
next.
cry too,
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
right?
Men can
Go
cry.
on.
I don't know which camera's on right now. But you're allowed to cry, doesn't matter. But
I don't know a first-year teacher who hasn't cried.
there you go.
I really don't.
No,
If
no.
you're being honest.
It does have an emotional toll on you. It's
Yeah.
a desk job, for example, might involve most of the day just sitting in front of a PC, which is of course taxing in a different way. But as a teacher, you're always there. You're always socializing, whether it's with pupils, whether it's with colleagues. You're always the entire day. You're just socializing. It does take a toll on you at the end of the day. But anyway, let me just wrap it up. My thing that I would say that I really learned last internship was, don't be afraid to mess up. And sometimes just have the confidence to just try something out and just see what happens. And that's something I'm really going to try next internship. So
Amazing, Max.
yeah, hopefully.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah. So Tom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, because with the last sentence, you kind of took the one that I had in mind. Great. No, but I would say stand up for yourself if you want to try out different methods, because that was one of the things that I really did learn during this last teaching practice, that even if your mentor wants you to teach in a certain way, you are allowed to stand up for yourself and be like, yeah, no, but I'm here to try new stuff out. I want to try this new activity that I thought of, and then to actually implement it, because like Max said, you shouldn't be afraid to mess it up. If that happens, okay, all great, you will learn from it, and then you can move forward. So if your mentor teacher wants you to teach in a certain style that doesn't suit you, try it out. If it doesn't work, also inform your mentor teacher about this, because that was one of the things that for me was one of my biggest issues. And during the first half of my teaching practice, where I would just be like, okay, well, apparently this is the way I'm going to teach now. And then in the second half, I was like, yeah, but this is not me as a teacher. So in a way, it's really try to search for yourself as a teacher. I think that's the best way to...
I love the professional identity course that we have. I think
Yep.
it helps encourage that. I also admire the mentor teacher who can really let go of control of how they facilitate to allow you that experience.
Or even encourage you.
Encourage you. It's very, it's not common, you know, when you get a mentor teacher who really lets you try to discover who you are, because they feel responsible for all the students in their class, right? They have to relinquish control.
Yeah.
So I admire the ones that can do that.
Yeah, no, because that was the well, for me, a weird thing that once I told him that I want to try out new things, that all of a sudden it was like, oh yeah, okay, your classroom, try whatever you want. And I was like, oh, well, I was not expecting that, but sure,
Don't be
then let's
afraid
go.
of your mentors.
So
You know?
that's-
They're there to help you.
That's the key then, is the communication. So don't be afraid to experiment, to figure
Take
out
initiative.
who you are,
Yeah.
but take the initiative,
Yeah.
communicate with your mentor teacher and say, hey,
Yeah.
I'd really like to try this. Great advice. Great advice.
Yeah.
Do you have anything left, Peter?
Well, we talked a lot about the didactics and the teaching and stuff, but I would also say, and unfortunately during this time it's a little bit different, but enjoy and take what's in the classroom, your friendliness, your communication with colleagues into the place you're at, and experience where you're at, and I think that's such an amazing part of our education. We are able to go everywhere, and we're able to experience this, and we are able to take these experiences into our classroom again. I think if you're happy and if you're communicative and you're a friendly person, well, outside of your classroom, and you have these connections, and you have these people you meet, and you're able to see different things, you take that into your classroom. You take your friendliness, and you take your inspiration and all the things you see, you take that into your classroom. So I would say also, and of course this applies less to this year, but I guess to the upcoming many years, I would say that as well to new students. Experience where you're at, and try to make the most of it. Even if and that's not always going to happen either.
No.
I know that I had an experience right now which I wasn't able to be my friendly, communicative self. But even that will teach you things.
Yep.
And I think everything that didn't keep me from experiencing the country, going around, trying to visit places, and I took that into the classroom again, because I think you take yourself into the classroom, and that's why we already talked about.
Make the best of your situation.
Yeah.
For sure.
I'd like to connect with that, and that is when I was a young teacher, I used to spend so much time trying to get the curriculum right, trying to get the lessons right, staying up really late, being fatigued and tired, right? Coming into the classroom, and it wasn't easy to bring my best Shannon self into the classroom, to be present and lighthearted and positive, because I had spent all night preparing, right?
You were drained.
So the preparation is important, but this being able to access who you are, your own presence, and what makes you unique, bringing it into the classroom. You said that so well, Peter.
Thank you.
It's really great.
And kids can always tell if you're not necessarily putting on a fake persona, but if you're, if you're being very reserved and you're just focusing on the learning and just the fundamental thing, like the students can always tell, even if they are not aware of the fact that they can tell. Subconsciously they become aware of it. And I think another tip I'd like to throw out is one thing that my mentor teacher told me as well is really interact with the kids. I mean, that's why you're there. If you didn't want to do that, you'd just give speeches or something like that. I mean, or you maybe go give university lectures in a big room where everyone just writes down notes. But you're there to form a connection. And I noticed that I tried that more in the second half of my internship this autumn. And it was extremely rewarding. I really cherished those moments. Like I started, sometimes making jokes with the kids and kind of, pulling their leg a little, and that's really fun. That's really what being a teacher is about.
Relationships are important to education and teaching and learning, but I do think in international contexts, it's even more important. It's fair to say.
We're all strangers,
Really.
Yeah, and I mean, also one of the things that Peter mentioned, also be aware of your surroundings. While you're on teaching practice, get to know the city or the country where you're teaching at.
Absolutely.
And I mean, that is also something, if you go to a culture that is very different from your own.
Yeah.
It is something that you can then take with you into the classroom to better understand your
Absolutely.
students.
Take advantage of your placement, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
it's difficult, and Tom and I, for example, when we were in India, we were on campus, so it was actually kind of hard for us to see a lot of India.
Yeah.
But unless that's your situation, and it's difficult, like, because you especially the first time you go on the long internship, it's probably going to really consume you with stress, and you're going to feel so tied down by it, and you won't be able to fully, you know, always go out and do everything, but definitely try to do as much as you can.
Yeah.
And I think
Even
Peter
the
really did
small
that last
things,
year.
when you bring it into the classroom and you went to that favorite spot in the community and you come back and you say, oh, I saw the Bill Clinton statue, right?
Yeah,
and I was in
exactly.
Kosovo, and everyone knows, oh, wow. And they're curious, and
Yeah.
and you do build your relationships.
And that
by
makes you
getting
look-
to know
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
place
And it makes you
are.
look good as a teacher, because then you're not just the boring adult standing up front, but you're actually someone who the kids can suddenly tell, oh, you know, Mr. Kemp or Mr. Neistat, you know, oh, they're actually interested in our culture and our
Yeah.
city.
We talked
that
about,
makes you a lot more appealing already, I think. you
We
know?
talked about cooking, for example, on our way here. And if you like cooking, for example, what I did
Yeah.
in my final lesson, I taught World War I. And in my final lesson, I was like, we're going to do something different today. I am going to make a meal that they would cook in World War I, for example. And those are really nice lessons. Those are things you can take away. And I think students will like this friendly, open person, if that's what you are, right? If you're a strict
Yeah.
teacher, that's fine as well.
Yeah.
Perfect. But I think that it's better to be this friendly, open person and be less stressed than cram yourself down and try to get this lesson done.
Yeah.
Just connect with them more then.
And
Do
anyone
a
can
fun
stand at the
lesson.
front and talk and give a lecture, but you know, it takes more skill and more. I think you have to be even a bit more daring and willing to go out of your comfort zone to actually be up there and try your hardest to connect with the students rather than just teaching them the material.
Yeah.
And that's also something ITESS really emphasizes. So that's another
No, and I mean,
very good aspect.
for me, it also one of the things that is also important to keep in the back of your head, and it's actually one of the things that we also spoke about during the COBIS webinar, is that whenever you go home, you need to make sure that you at least have something left in the tank. You can't be you can't be completely exhausted by the time you go home, because you also need those moments to just do something for yourself, or to do something with your family or with friends.
Yep.
And that for me is one of the things that I also really took to heart this teaching practice, because when we were in India, well, we were on in the boarding facilities, so
We
were
never
on
escaped,
site.
you know, we never escaped.
We were constantly at the school, so for us it was also, we couldn't really snap out of that role of a teacher. So being a teacher 24/7, that brings a whole new dimension to it, because not only can you not just joke around just with the two of us, because there are constantly students around.
You have to set the example.
You have to
obviously.
set the example. You have to correct unwanted behavior as well. So that was one of the things that for me I really took to heart this time. Okay, I also need those moments where I can just decide, if I want to do nothing, I'll do nothing.
And try to have a day off, you know, in
Yeah.
the week if you can, which I also didn't manage to do a lot in my teaching practice. But it's something to really, it can make a really big difference if you just have your Sunday off, you
Yeah.
know, and you just get to, it doesn't matter what you do, and, you know, it's good if you maybe, you know, get some reading done, like in just like a fictional book that you're reading, for example, or maybe you work on a hobby of yours, like if you play an instrument, or you
Work out.
You work out, yeah. Those are the things that you can't just be a teacher 24/7 like Tom and I more or less were in India. You have to be able to switch off and get away from it.
Yeah,
Finding that work balance that does help you fuel your tank is
Yeah.
so important.
it really is.
And
And
especially
especially
with a
with
job
the-
like teaching, so
Yeah.
draining.
Yeah, and especially with the world that's out there
Yeah.
during your teaching
Yeah.
practice, what we mentioned before.
Yeah,
You have to enjoy it. Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
takes a stamina. It takes a discipline. It takes emotional presence to be. It takes a lot of energy. And so, how do you get that energy? You get it from each other,
And from your
you
students,
know,
of
and
course.
from your students. You do, but you also need to take something that helps you reset.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, thank you so much
Yeah.
for taking this time today. It was really enlightening for me to hear from you, and really inspiring.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for
Yeah.
having us.
Yeah, it was amazing.
It was
Yeah,
really fun to
yeah, I enjoyed
share-
it. I
share
enjoyed
that.
hearing about your experiences as well, because
Yeah,
you don't
likewise.
have this deep of a conversation about it every day, of course, and
no.
you do talk about certain aspects, because what you mentioned in the beginning as well, things always pop up. Maybe it's in a week when you're talking about it. Maybe it's in a year. Talking about it does help, but there's new things you think about every single time you talk about teaching or
That's
you
true,
talk
yeah.
about.
And a thought is just a thought until you actually express it.
Mm,
That's when it
yeah.
becomes a thing. So it's so important to just share your thoughts. I
Little
think.
philosophical turn
But
here.
it's
yeah,
true,
yeah,
but it's
yeah,
true.
yeah.
2 years
It's
from
alright, it's
now,
alright.
You're going to be thinking back to
Yeah.
some of these things
Yep.
and making connections.
And what I really like is people are going to be able to watch this,
Mm.
and you know,
I'm gonna
not
be
to-
able
We-
to watch
we
this.
are
We're
gonna
gonna be able to watch
yeah,
this as
no,
well,
for
yeah.
real, yeah.
Every time we will look back at this, we will reevaluate the situation
Exactly,
again,
yeah.
and we will again, based on wherever we are, based on whatever experience we're having at that point in time, our view on
Yeah, we're gonna view it
what
from a
we're
different
what we're
eye,
talking
exactly.
about right now. It's going to change.
No, but
Yeah.
especially I think this will be a very useful thing for people to look at if they're considering going into
Yep,
ITESS, because I think it
definitely.
will give them a good idea of the kind of the kind of person you should be if you want to teach.
Yep.
Because not everyone is meant to be a teacher, and there's no shame in that at all. But that's why I think it will be good for people to look at this and hear
Yep.
what we have to say after being here almost 3 years now. I think
Surviving 3 years.
Still surviving.
surviving 3 years, yeah.
Still here,
still
yeah.
standing, still standing.
Still thriving.
Yes, still
Great.
still performing
Yes.
top capacity.
Yes,
Whatever that
definitely,
means,
yeah.
But I think that's why, like, reflection, because we do put emphasis on reflection as well, and that's pretty much what we're doing right here as well.
This is
And-
reflection.
And like, it's sometimes you think, oh, do I have to reflect on this again, you know? And it gets tiring sometimes, and you're like, why am I even reflecting on this again? But this is what it's about. It's like,
Yeah.
because
And doing it with someone
Yeah,
else
yeah.
really takes it to another dimension.
This is different than just typing.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah,
Alone at
than
home.
just typing a portfolio
Yeah.
where you are the only one thinking about it, because now you're
Yeah.
getting different input
Yeah.
as well, and for me that's extremely
Yeah.
valuable.
Yeah.
But we do also give a big presentation at the end of our internship with 3 of us, and you do get all these different viewpoints and all these different people.
Yeah,
And-
not-
and you-
not-
and you
not-
get
not
to-
this year though, but
No, not this year. No. But like in the previous years,
You have
with,
to
with
explain
our
it, yeah.
with
Yeah.
our didactical educational studies teachers, you present your portfolio, and that you really go in depth. Like it's something like
Yeah.
what we're having here, discussion about the different things, and then you focus on certain aspects that are relevant for you. of
Exactly,
course.
because it's
Yeah.
easy to write down. Oh, I learned this. I developed a lot. But then, on the one hand, explaining the same thing you've typed to an audience, even if it's just 2 or 3 people, that's already a completely different challenge. But then, what we have with our assessments, of course, is the lecturers will ask us very specific questions
To
that are
you,
really
yeah.
exactly that are really meant to challenge you on a deeper level, where you really have to think about it. And that's something that's if you're always just thinking about what you've done and never write it down or never talk about it with another person, you're not gonna be challenged like that. And I think that's it's so important.
So those variety of formats of reflecting, individually with certain prompts, a certain structure, getting together with colleagues, working on your computer, but then talking, 2 years from now. So,
Yeah.
I think this reflective practice is really the key to
Yeah.
this lifelong learning teaching
Yeah.
profession.
Yeah.
And maybe in a few years' time you'll do something similar with whatever cohort of students is at our point then, and it will be very interesting to see how does it compare. Do they state it? Because of course, ideally they should have similar things to say, but who knows?
And who knows?
Who knows?
And really, in the back of my mind, the whole time I'm thinking, so how can this be continued with the students?
Yeah.
Because in the next cohorts, because you were a small cohort,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I'm always thinking about what is that experience as
Yeah.
we grow and as we grow quickly. And so, no, you've set a standard with me, but mostly your willingness to get together today, your openness, your vulnerability to share things you were challenged with. That's what I'm really most impressed with. And I really hope that our next cohorts are willing to take that kind of risk and engagement.
Well, I mean,
So-
we do know, the 3 of us combined, we know a very large portion of the cohort below us, for example.
Yeah.
And I think I speak for all 3 of us when I say a lot of those people are equally as able to really well, they don't really. They also have the ability to just kind of talk about their flaws. They don't, and they don't have an inflated ego where they feel like they always need to look perfect. I really don't, and I think that's also another thing as a teacher that's quite important. Even though I think a lot of teachers who are already teaching, they do have this kind of ego to, where they feel like their approach is perfect. But it's something that we as young teachers and as international teachers, is something that we should really get away from. And I think in education, be open to. Yeah, your approach not being the exact right approach for every other person.
So if we were to say part of our professional identity of ITESS, I hear empathy, I hear ongoing learning, I hear risk-taking, courage,
initiative,
collaboration, initiative,
well, self-reflection, I suppose.
Self-reflection, getting to know the community.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Getting to know others.
I mean, with getting to know the community, also one big element within ITESS is respect. Everyone respects one another.
Even if you do really disagree, then be respectful. It's still a person you're talking to.
I think we could talk for a long time.
I think we should really wrap it up now.
We need to wrap it up. So thank you everyone for recording us today, for giving us this opportunity to get together during this COVID time. It's really been special. And we hope that you are able to gain something from this as well for many years to come. Thank you.
Thank you.